Okay, today we are multiplying and simplifying radicals. And so it's something you've probably seen before, but we're going to go over it anyways, because it's always good to review. The rule for multiplying radicals. So if we have the square root of a and we multiply it by the square root of b, it's going to give us the square root of a times b. This is symmetric to the rule for simplifying radicals. So if you have the square root of a times b, that is the square root of a times the square root of b. So you just have to remember the square root of a product is equal to the product of the square roots of each factor. So if you see we had square root of 75 breaks down to 25 times 3, which is 5 square roots of 3. So we're going to go through 6 examples. This should be pretty quick. So we have the square root of 3 times the square root of 5. That's just the square root of 3 times 5, which is the square root of 15, which does not simplify. Now, number 2, we have 2 different ways we can do it. We know that 18 times 2 is 36, and the square root of 36 is 6. Or we can break down 18. So I can break down 18 into 9 times 2, and then we still have that square root of 2. Anytime you have the same square root twice, it becomes the whole number outside. And then the square root of 9 is 3. So 2 times 3 is 6. So you can see how we got it 2 different ways to get the same answer. Number 3, now we're adding in numbers outside of the square root. So for this one, I'm just going to break down the square root of 6 and the square root of 14. So I'm going to have 6 times the square root of 3 times the square root of 2 times 4 times the square root of 2 times the square root of 7. So I'm going to have 6 times 4, so I know I have 24 because those are the whole numbers out front. Now I have a pair of 2's. So square root of 2 times square root of 2 is just 2. And then I have the square root of 3 and the square root of 7 that don't go with anything. So I'm going to put them inside here. And so then my final answer is 24 times 2, which is 48. And then inside the square root is 3 times 7, or 21. So you can kind of go back and forth, take things, separate them, and then combine them. When we look at 3 square roots of 35 times 2 square roots of 63, I'm going to do 3 times 2 is 6, so I'm going to leave that right away. But then I have square root of 5, square root of 7, and then 63 is 9 times 7. So I'm going to say, okay, I know the square root of 9 is 3, so I have 6 times 3. And then I have 2 of the square roots of 7. So if I have 2 of them, I can take it out. So then I have times 7. And then the last thing I have to use is the square root of 5, which I'm just going to leave as the square root of 5. So 6 times 3 times 7. So that's 6 times 7, 42, times 3 is 126, times the square root of 5 is my final answer. Okay, we have 2 square roots of 5 squared. That's just 2 squared times the square root of 5 squared. So 4 times 5 is 20. Now, I had a student ask me, what happens if that's to the third power? So if we had 2 square roots of 5 to the third power. So really all we're doing is rewriting 2 square roots of 5 3 times. So I'd have 2 times the square root of 5 times 2 times the square root of 5 times 2 square roots of 5. Well, when I do that, 2 times 2 times 2, I know that's 8. And then I have a square root of 5 and a square root of 5. So I have 2 of those. That's another 5. And then I just have that last square root of 5. So I'll just leave it. So my answer for that would be 40 square roots of 5 if I had 2 square roots of 5 raised to the third power. And then our final one, 14 So the square root of 14x to the 5th times the square root of 7x to the 9th. So I'm going to break down 14 into 2 times 7. I'm just going to leave x to the 5th, and then I'm going to have an x square root of 7 and a square root of x to the 9th. So I have the 7s. I can take those out. I have a square root of 2. I'm just going to leave it as a square root of 2. And then I have an x to the 5th and an x to the 9th. That becomes the square root of x to the 14th because we add the exponents. And so here's the easy thing. When we take the square root of a variable, you just cut the power in half. So the square root of x to the 14th is x to the 7th. So you can write this as 7 square roots of 2 times x to the 7th, or you can say 7 x to the 7th times the square root of 2. Either way, I don't really care. Now, what happens when we have, say we had x to the 15th? How would we do that? It doesn't cut in half. Well, you would break it down into the square root of x to the 14th times the square root of x. So it becomes x to the 7th times the square root of x. So anytime you have an odd power, you're always going to have a square root of that variable left over. All right, hopefully you liked learning how to multiply and simplify radicals. Be sure to follow this YouTube feed.